welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody, on TWB. The movie 42 recently came out to rave reviews. It's the Jackie Robinson story. Let's take a look.
Every so often, Hollywood tackles a real-life figure of epic proportions. The current blockbuster film 42, The Story of an American Legend, is one such example. It follows the life and career of Jackie Robinson, the first African-American to play in what was then an all-white Major League Baseball. Critics and viewers alike have hailed the film for introducing a new generation to the struggles and triumphs of one of sport's greatest heroes. This week, our panel takes a look at 42, the man, the movie, and the message.
And you guys would be the panel. So let's take a look at the man and the message. What do we think of the movie? Thoughts, Dee Dee?
Oh, loved it. I mean, it's very inspiring, and but at the same time upsetting, because you're thinking, wow, you know, this was terrible. I mean, it was so hateful and such bigotry, and it's just so unfortunate that that happens. And it's eye-opening. I think it's good for kids to watch, especially.
Yes,
seeing that, you know, the story happened, and it's a true story. Being a history major, I really prefer nonfiction, so really enjoyed it.
But they didn't know life any other way back then. I mean, now we can look at it from our perspective, but that was
So
the
sad.
norm. I mean, it's awful. Yohuru.
I think it was a great picture, certainly a feel-good picture, and a great depiction of Robinson. There hasn't been a major motion picture to deal with Jackie Robinson in quite some time, so it's timely in that sense. What I didn't like about it, and it's not really a criticism, but just my own personal preference, it only deals with those first 2 years of that great experiment undertaken by Jackie and Branch Rickey. I wish they would have expanded it and looked at Jackie's life a little bit more broadly, even if it had been something that was more retrospective at the end, or even a 10 or 15 minute period of kind of looking where he went from that point.
Right. I mean, that maybe a documentary
Yeah.
should be made, or maybe a sequel. What did you think? Was there something you didn't like about the film?
No, I actually liked it very much, and I thought it was inspiring, and I thought it was, you know, done visually beautifully, and I liked Harrison Ford's role as well. I thought that was good, and it was fascinating because, because it reminded me of Martin Luther King about how you fight, but you don't fight, you know, like the bad guys are, you know, like the bigots are. I mean, you're going to do it in a nicer way, and you're not going to fight back in a way like what he would say. He goes, you know, they're going to expect you to do that. They're going to expect you to act that way.
Right.
So I thought that was a good message.
Yeah, I also think it's important to mention you don't have to be a sports fan to appreciate this movie. This isn't really about the sports. It's the message.
But it did bring in a bigger audience, I think, because it was a sports movie.
Yes,
so
that always helps. But you know, if you don't like baseball, don't think, oh, I don't like baseball, I'm not going to see this movie, because there's a really important message to send here. We do have another member of our panel I want to introduce. We should have Nsenga Knight joining us. She's an interdisciplinary artist and filmmaker. Nsenga, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, it's nice to join you all.
Great, thanks for joining us. So tell us, what are your thoughts on the movie? Did it accurately portray Jackie Robinson, the man?
You know, I'm no expert on Jackie Robinson, but growing up and going to public schools in New York, I grew up in New York, and we heard a lot about Jackie Robinson. You know, there's the highway named after him, and there was a scholarship, you know, that I think once you were in high school you could apply for. He was a big part of the sort of, you know, the legacy of just growing up in Brooklyn, you know, and just growing up as an African American. And I think what I was always taught about him was he was just this amazing kind of all-American black guy, you know, who was able to integrate baseball. And so they definitely did a great job in keeping up his reputation. You know, the one thing that I think maybe the film did that was a little bit, you know, that was helpful too, was showing that he as a person and also his wife were people who they weren't complacent about this sort of segregation and about Jim Crow and about racism, but their way of going about fighting that wasn't particularly militant. It was something that I guess we would think of for the time period that they you know, that they were living in. They were able to break these sort of barriers, but still be able to be likable and still able to be, you know,
it's a tough balance for sure. Yeah.
Yes, it is a very tough balance. So, so in that regard, I didn't find out anything particularly new, but I did find out more sort of nuance.
Yes.
You know, more nuance than that.
I agree, and that's why these movies need to be made. Jackie Robinson, some say, was a reluctant activist. Yohuru, do you agree with that, and why?
I think so in this sense. There's a danger in a film like this of boulderizing Jackie Robinson even more than he already is, and kind of sanitizing the story. In 1944, Jackie Robinson was arrested in Texas for refusing to give up his seat on a segregated bus while he was in the military. The only reason he wasn't court-martialed is there was actually a ruling by the U.S. Military authorities that said there was to be no segregation on U.S. Army bases. But that shows Jackie as a fighter. Right. And in a lot of ways, the problem with this film, even though it's very good, is that it almost sanitizes Robinson to the point that we don't see, A, the hardship of segregation, the real consequences that people face for bucking the system, and then secondly, that in some sense, he understood that this was going to be a very dangerous undertaking. He did not take that lightly. And so when they say reluctant activist, that's very true, only in the sense that when he signed on, he recognized it was going to be difficult. But if you read his autobiography and the works of other scholars, they all acknowledge that he really wasn't prepared, at least in the very beginning, for the backlash that he received.
Do you agree with him? Do you see him as a reluctant activist?
Sort of, yes, but I thought they portrayed it in the movie well, though, because that was what Harrison Ford was telling him to do. I thought he was fighting that, and of course he's going to. I mean, this is one of the first people I had to deal with this. This was before the movement in the 60s. It was a terrible time and very difficult for him. So I think the movie depicted that well, and yes, of course he struggled, and of course he had those fights. I mean, you think anyone would, especially in a position like that. But no, I thought it was good. And as far as being reluctant, I mean, how could you not be?
How did you take its portrayal? Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, it's interesting for me because I think the problem there is that it is framed through Mr. Ricky. And I think part of the criticism that you get from, and you've seen this in some of the reviews, is that people say they've robbed Jackie Robinson of a degree of his own agency. That this was a choice that he and his wife made, and that they were understood, got death threats, threats against his wife, threats against his child, that this was a very serious undertaking, and anyone would have been taken sober reflection before deciding on that course of action.
Right. I want to bring Nsenga in. Nsenga, especially sort of being a part of this younger generation, what are your thoughts on what the other panel members just had to say?
You know, it's interesting because I think even in the film, this sort of idea of a reluctant activist, in a sense, I get a sort of question that because, when we see like his wife and even like in that scene at the airport where she purposefully goes into the white women only restroom, because she's like, okay, she's never seen it before, I guess because she's from California, and they were coming, and from what I sort of gathered from the film, they were coming from an environment, or at least she was coming from an environment where this sort of segregation didn't exist, but that she felt that it was wrong, and she knew she was doing something that would be considered trespassing, and she was testing something out. So in that sense, and then we get another scene in the film where early on in the film where they're him and his, I guess, teammates, I can't remember the name of the team, but it was an all-black team. They're traveling in the bus, and the gas station, the person who works at the gas station is telling him, you can't, use that restroom, and he's like, oh, well, well then we'll have to go somewhere else to get our, like 99 gallons of gas. So in a sense, you get this, I'm glad that, I don't know the name, but of the historian that he mentioned, this thing of what he did in Texas, him refusing to get up, because I got the sense that there was more behind that.
But how did it make you feel, just to go back to what you were saying before, someone who didn't experience this, to see it on the screen? Tell us about your feelings and your emotions watching something like that. How affected were you?
It's familiar. We've been like taught this stuff over and over again, that this is the way how people lived, and that there was a code, and I think there's also, there was recently published a few years ago a book called The Warmth of Other Suns, which is talking about that migration of Black people from the South to the North, and it talks a lot about this, the segregation code, and I think for myself as well, my family is from the Caribbean and South America, and we hear stories of people coming from the Caribbean who are black people from the Caribbean coming to the United States during the time of segregation and doing things that were, even similar, because they were like, you can't. It was something that was kind of out of their realm of that they weren't to be put in their place necessarily, you know, in that sort of way. So I think for myself, these stories are still familiar, so it's not like a shock, you know. It's
right.
It's familiar. No, I didn't personally experience it, but
right. But you know,
story.
it sort of lends itself to a greater question when we think in terms of Hollywood and movies based on true stories. How accurate does Hollywood have to be? There's sort of this creative license involved, and there's another movie out right now, Pain and Gain, which they're sort of billing as a comedy, a slapstick comedy, but it's based on a very serious true story, and there's been a lot of backlash because this was a very serious situation that happened in Miami, and they've sort of changed it.
You would never guess. You're right with the trailer. It's this crazy madcap.
So sort of this idea of, I mean, does Hollywood have a responsibility to be accurate? What do you think, Yohuru?
They do and they don't. They have a responsibility in the sense that you would hope they'd want to produce films that were conscious in that way. But at the end of the day, it's an industry that's based on whether they can draw people into the theaters.
It's entertainment, right.
So we hope documentaries would fulfill that role, and they often do. Kim Burns, who did the baseball series, is now working on a documentary on Jackie Robinson that will be far more comprehensive.
Right.
I could give the movie a very deep historical critique, for example, in talking about how in many ways civil rights was a victim of the Cold War more than anything else. And that experiment came at a time when the Soviet Union had a deep critique of the United States and American democracy. You don't have African Americans playing baseball, but you say you're the leader of the free world. But I don't expect Brian Helgeland to do that in this film. I expect him to tell me a really good story, and I want to leave the movie knowing a little bit more about Jackie Robinson, maybe making me want to look him up and explore his life a little bit more.
But you're a historian. You know, I was a history major too, so we look at things very differently. And this was a movie. It was a Hollywood movie, and they made Jackie Robinson look like a hero. I mean, they made him look great, and I think
agree,
that's a good thing.
I agree.
And I know what you're saying.
We're on the same page. But if you want to inspire young people to take action, then we've got to create heroes that have agency, who look normal. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Rachel Robinson, Jackie Robinson, when he refuses to get on that bus, that's about economic power more than anything else. And saying, you know, you spend your dollars. And that's what all those boycotts were about, in essence. You know, we won't spend our dollars here. So in that sense, Jackie's part of a long black freedom struggle.
Can these films have a positive impact, though, when they get history wrong? Do they?
Well, I don't think they got history wrong. I think what you're saying, Yohuru, is it didn't include everything.
Right.
And you would have liked for it to be a little
comprehensive. I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, and this was not comprehensive. I mean, it was definitely more inspiring and talked about him as a hero. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing because it's a start.
Right.
I think it's a start.
Okay.
And
all
I
right.
agree with you,
Final
Dee Dee.
thought.
Kids need heroes. So we're in agreement there. I guess where we disagree is that for me, for someone as important as Jackie Robinson, I felt like they needed to broach his activism. I felt like they needed to really go a little bit more deeper and let people know that this was a very difficult, and they were facing some
It didn't do injustice in the way it could have.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thanks
It's
so
still
much,
great
you
fun.
guys. We appreciate your insight. Nsenga, final thought, 20 seconds.
Okay, I would just say that I felt that the film, it did a lot of touching on different issues. It touched a bit on him having been in the military and coming back from that, and you know, having not experienced that sort of segregation there, and then coming here and then sort of, you know, being that. I think that inspired him too. I think it touched on, it did a good job on touching on that economic factor, you know, from the gas station scene to the way how the manager of the team was basically like, you know, we see the color green,
right.
you know. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nsenga, but we got a break. Yeah. I apologize. But thank you so much for your thoughtful insights. We appreciate it. And thanks to our panel, as always. We're out of time. Thank you for your insights and fresh outlooks. Remember, follow us on Facebook and Twitter at @AbrewTV, #FreshOutlook. I'm TWB, you're at TW Brill. We'll see you next time on Fresh Outlook. Thanks for being with us.